this video, I'm going to tell you what you can expect when you purchase this pattern, how to print it out and put it together, how to choose your size, and then how to make fit alterations to make this pattern work for you. I highly recommend watching that last section if you do make this dress. This video will be timestamped so you can skip ahead to any part you would like. Let's get into it. When you purchase this pattern, you will see 3 files. One of them is the full-size PDF pattern, one is the instructions, and one is the cutting guide. So the PDF pattern includes the full-size pieces for the bodice, and the cuffs, and the pocket, and the sleeves. The cutting guide includes guidance for how to cut out the skirt, as well as the waist ties, the facing strips, and the placket strips. If you're wondering why I didn't put these pieces in the full-size PDF pattern, it's because they're fairly simple shapes, mostly rectangles, and then the skirt is trapezoids. They would have taken up a lot of pages that you'd have to cut out and tape together, so I thought rather than have you tape together 60 pages, I'll just write out the dimensions and you can map them out on your fabric. And then the third file is the instructions. So you really only need to print out the PDF pattern, although you're welcome to print out the instructions and the cutting guide if you would like. I recommend skimming through the cutting guide to check if you want to print it out or if you just want to read it off of your computer screen or phone screen. So to print out this pattern, you want to make sure that the scale of your printer is set at do not scale or actual size, or it'll say scale and you have to type in 100%. It really just depends on your printer model, but one of those 3 you should be able to find in the printing options, and then print out just the first page and take a ruler and check the scale in the top left corner to make sure that it's true to size before you go and print out the rest of the pattern. Once you've printed out the full pattern to scale, go ahead and cut off one side horizontally and one side vertically from all the pieces. So I like to do the right side and the bottom, but you could do the top and the left, it doesn't matter. As long as you stay consistent throughout all your pages, you should be good. Trim the edge to the outside of the gray border, and then take one edge that's cut to the gray border and overlap it onto the next piece, lining up the gray borders and matching the blue stars in the corner. There's a number and a letter on each page. It goes A1, A2, A3, A4, it's the other way because I'm probably mirrored, but A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, and then B1, B2, B3, B4, B5, B6, etc. It won't be a perfect rectangle because I didn't need all of that space, so rather than have you print out blank pages, it's just kind of an odd shape where there's some pages missing, but they wouldn't have had anything on them, so don't worry about it if it's not a full rectangle. It shouldn't be a full rectangle. Choosing your size. The way this pattern is, the back is elasticized at the waist and the lower back, so the waist is a bit more flexible than the bust as far as fitting. Technically, because this garment has an elasticized back panel and also waist ties, if your waist is about an inch larger or smaller than the size chart, it should be completely fine. You can also create a hybrid size using multiple different sizes, and we'll go into that next. So let's talk about fitting. This is probably the most important part of this video because fitting is crucial to make this garment look really gorgeous. Miniature pattern pieces cut out. Arguably the most important thing to fit in this bodice is the vertical proportion. So because this bodice has a yoke and then a upper bodice part, which is kind of like a cup, you need the line between the yoke and the upper part to sit exactly at your under bust. I highly recommend making a mock-up of just the bodice first to do some initial alterations before you make this pattern or even make a wearable mock-up. So starting with the bodice, or the upper front part, like I said, it should hit right under the bust. So if it is too short, if it's kind of cutting in mid-bust, then you probably need to lengthen this part. So to do that, the easiest way is to draw a horizontal line on your pattern below the armhole. I'm using a square ruler, but that's not completely necessary. You could use a straight ruler as well. Try to make sure that it's parallel though to the center front edge. So I've drawn a horizontal line. Now I'm going to slash and spread it. So we're just going to add an equal amount of height all the way across, keeping the center front in line. So I'll draw a line for the center front. And then lining up the front line of the upper and lower parts with this line. So now you can smooth out the line on the outside. It's hard to see because of how small the scale is. There's really not much to smooth out, but you just kind of smooth this little bit out here and cut this out. And now you have added however much length you just added to the lower section of the bodice. You can also do the same thing in the middle of the arm side up here. I don't recommend doing this too much because then the arm side will get much larger and it'll be harder to lift your arm when the sleeve is in. You may need to do it a little bit though. You also may need to do the opposite and shorten the bodice. If you are finding that you get this kind of blousing effect of the top and it's not really sitting against your body, then you may want to try shortening it a little bit. A way that you can check that is to kind of take the top of the bodice and literally just pull it up and see if you pull it up slightly, does it fit well now? So you can do exactly the same thing we did below the armhole here, except instead of adding space, you subtract space, and then again you would redraw that line on the side and cut it out. If you are finding that the vertical height is correct in the center front and the side, but the middle is sitting too high, then what you might want to do is add more curve to the bottom here. So you can do this if you have a large cup size. You may want to do this initially right away when you cut out the pattern rather than adding it later. But what you do basically is look at the curve here and go down. You could go down maybe 1/2 inch and curve this. I'll tape it down so it's easier to see what I'm doing. So here we have the bottom edge, and I'm going to start and end at the same points where the pattern already starts and ends, but exaggerate the curve in the middle. If you have a relatively short distance from your shoulder to your bust, but a fairly large cup, you probably want to do this. And like I said, you can go ahead and do it right away as you cut out the pattern. You can kind of grade between sizes, maybe go down 2, 3, 4, even like 5 sizes, and curve that and then go back up to your size. And of course, if you make a mock-up and there's too much vertical space there, you can just go ahead and trim it off. So if you do add vertical space, you may want to add vertical space to the back panel. It's not strictly necessary, but depending on how much length you add, if you're adding maybe more than 1/2 inch to 1 inch, you may want to go in and add just a little bit of vertical height to the back. So you would do that exactly the same way. This will have a fold line. Starting from the fold in the center back, drawing a horizontal line that is perpendicular to the center back, slashing and spreading it. If you have very broad shoulders, this is going to be exactly the same broad shoulder alteration that I show in the robin blouse video, but I'll just kind of repeat it here. What you can do is just extend the end of the shoulder. So to do that, I would take a ruler and line it up with the shoulder line and just continue it off. So here I have continued those lines, and then I'm going to measure out. Say you could add 1/2 inch. Maybe that looks like this. Only a little bit. Maybe I'll exaggerate it a little bit more so you can see better, and then add the same amount on both sides, and then from that point curve back into your armhole. So that would look something like this. As far as the waist size, like I mentioned earlier, this is a very flexible pattern as far as waist size, which is one of the wonderful things about it. The elastic shirred panel in the back tends to compress a little bit more than the waist size written on the pattern. So if your waist is just slightly smaller than the pattern, technically you could just leave it as is. And then on the other side, it should stretch all the way to be the same size as the bust. So technically you could wear it with the same size bust as waist. But I don't really recommend that, because what will start to happen then, because the front is a set size, the front has no elastic, the side seams at the waist will start to creep forward a little bit as the back elastic stretches out. So if your waist is more than, say, 1 inch bigger than the size chart, I would recommend expanding the front so that your side seams will sit nicely at the sides rather than kind of creeping towards the front. So to do that, let's get the yoke. Where is our yoke? Tape this down. There we go. Here we are working on 1/4 of the body because this yoke is cut on fold and it's only in the front. So we have 1/4 of the body, and normally I would tell you to take the room you want to add, divide it in half, because usually if you're working on a symmetrical garment, you only have half of the body, and then divide that between the front and the back. But this garment is a little bit different because the back already has a bunch of ease in the waist that gets elasticized down. The size of the back waist has more to do with the bust size than the waist size at all, because its entire purpose is just to be able to stretch to put on and take off this garment. So we're gonna leave the back alone and just assume that it will stretch more and only work with the front. So say we're adding 2 inches to the waist. So that's 1 inch in the front and 1 inch in the back, except the back is stretching. So we're gonna forget about the back. We're only add 1 inch, and then we're already here working on half of the front. So we only need to add half of an inch. First of all, you can kind of just grade between sizes because they're overlaid, that is absolutely an option. But say you already cut out the pattern and now you want to add some room to the waist. So I'm gonna go to the outer corner here and measure out 1/2 inch. This is tiny, so we'll just make something up. Say it's right here. And then take the yoke line and just kind of continue this curve going here. Don't curve it too extremely, just try to follow the curve that's already there. And then from this point, we're going to draw a straight line from here to the point that we just made. So now we've just added 1/2 inch of width, which will result in a full inch of width in the front, and then an inch of extra stretch in the back, which just happens give us an extra 2 inches in the waist. You can also do the opposite, take the waist in, and to do that you would kind of do the same thing on the other side, measure in, say you wanted to take it in this much, draw a straight line and blend it up to the top point. Another place that you can add or subtract vertical length in the bodice is the yoke. So I just turned off my camera because I forgot this part, but you do the same thing as we've been doing everywhere else. You keep the fold line completely straight and you would cut right here and slash and either spread it or unspread it to shorten or lengthen the yoke. Same exact way, make sure everything is even and make sure your fold line stays straight. Now let's talk about the sleeves. The sleeves are actually really important and I think a lot of people will need to alter them as far as the length. And that is because I've made them quite long in the hope that long-armed people, unlike me, will not have to lengthen them or won't have to lengthen them too much to get a good fit in the sleeve. But that also means that people with average or short arms are probably going to want to shorten the sleeve. And because it's a little bit of a bell sleeve, it's slightly more complicated than just cutting off the end. So I'll show you how to do that right now. The sleeve is shaped like this, and that means that you need to shorten the upper arm section and the lower arm section separately, because if I were to just cut this off, if I cut off maybe 1 inch, it'll be okay, but if I cut this off like 6 inches, I'm gonna lose all of this poof, and I'm also gonna lose the line where the sleeve opens. So I recommend shortening it above this curve. So we're gonna do exactly the same slashing and spreading thing, except we're going to unspread it because likely most people will need to shorten it. And then we are taking the top and overlapping it to make it shorter. Make sure that the fold line stays completely straight and the other side is the side that's not quite gonna line up and you're gonna have to true those lines yourself. Once you've shortened the upper part of the sleeve to fit your arm, then you can do the same thing with the lower part. I would make sure when you do the lower part that you're cutting below this curve at the side, but above the line here for the slit. So right in here, doesn't really matter where in this area you cut, but somewhere between there. Be careful not to over shorten the sleeve because the sleeve needs a little bit of extra length in order to have that wonderful poof. So ideally your sleeve will have a little bit more poof than mine does. I cut these a little bit short because I was a little bit short on fabric. So this is my final tip. Check the pieces against your body before making a mock-up. This is a really useful tool to kind of get a preliminary idea of what kind of alterations you're gonna need to make. And if you want to, you can make some of them before even creating a mock-up. So I'll give you examples of how each pattern piece should line up against your body if you just hold it up. So for the sleeve, if you hold it up, holding about 1/2 inch of the pattern up here, which is gonna look a lot different on a full-size pattern, hold about 1/2 inch at the sleeve crown and put it against your arm with your arm straight down. The pattern piece should end right about here, somewhere in this area, kind of between where your fingers start and like the middle of your fingers should be perfect. So mine is a little bit short, but for example, this is my pattern piece, and if I hold it up here and hold it just as you can see here, and the reason you hold it a little bit past is because you have to account for this little sleeve poof at the top. So I'm holding it up. Mine, like I said, is a little bit short. It should be hitting right around here. Obviously, I'm kind of holding it up so you can see, but you should do this with your arm straight down at your side. So obviously you can't do a precise fitting like that, but if the sleeve is a good 4 inches longer than your hand, you know you're probably gonna need to shorten it. And you can do the same thing with the upper arm shortening. You don't need to fit it precisely to your upper arm, but if you can do it kind of within an inch, you should be good. So that's another thing that you can do just by holding the pattern up to your body and double checking. That way you can use a mirror. Yeah, highly recommend that. The other pieces that I recommend doing this with are the front bodice and the yoke. So to do that, you can just take the pattern piece and line it up with where your shoulder seam should be, and line up the inner corner here with your neck meeting your shoulder, pull it down and see where it hits on your body. And it should hit just below your bust like this. If you hold it up and it's like down here, and you can crease the paper below your bust by like more than say ½ inch, then you're probably going to need to shorten that, and you can do that if you want right away before making a mock-up. On the other hand, if you hold it up and it is like this, it is way too high, then you know you're going to need to lengthen it. And again, you can do that right away without making a mock-up, save you mock-up fabric. Yeah, same thing with the yoke. So again, you hold it up on your body, right under your bust, and this way you can get a sense of if it's the right length. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for looking at the Josephine dress pattern. If you make it, I would love to see it. You can send it to me on social media, tag me, use the hashtag Josephine dress. I know there are already multiple Josephine dresses that exist, but you know, spam the hashtag and then it'll be ours. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments of this video and I will try to respond to all of them. Bye!